bringing forward this motion and highlighting this issue, which is yet another broken government promise. As we near the end of this debate, I think it's important to remind ourselves why we're having it in the first place. It's because the government has failed in a number of key commitments in relation to fuel poverty. In the renewed programme for government, Fianna Fáil and the Greens committed to a fuel poverty strategy by the end of 2009. Here we are, almost 12 months later, and we still don't have it. In the same document, it said, and I quote, "We will introduce a carbon tax in Budget 2010, and they cited that one of the guiding principles governing the tax is that, again to quote, those most at risk of fuel poverty will be protected." Well, we got the tax, but we never got the protection. We never got the compensating measures that had been promised in order to ensure that those most at risk of fuel poverty would be protected from the worst effects of it. When? We're waiting now. We're waiting now almost 12 months. In the budget speech, Minister, last December, while announcing the carbon levy, the Minister for Finance, Brian Lenihan, committed to a vouched fuel allowance scheme. And this is what he said. He said a vouched fuel allowance scheme will be developed to offset the increases for low-income families dependent on such fuels. But none has materialised. In the Dail, in a PQ reply on the 19th of January, the then Minister, Mary Hanafin, made the commitment that, before the tax is applied to fuels for home heating, arrangements are being made to assist those most at risk of fuel poverty. The second promise broken. The Minister clearly stated that assistance was to be provided before the tax was imposed on home heating and not just on solid fuels, as the Taoiseach mistakenly claimed this morning. In the Dáil on the 20th of April this year, during oral question time, Minister O'Cuive said that he would have a report from the interdepartmental group by the end of the month. That was the month of April. Now, 6 months later, there is still no outcome. Indeed, on his own website, Minister O'Cuive declares that the interdepartmental working group was to report to government by the end of June to, as he said, allow for any proposed measures to be implemented when the heating season starts again at the end of September 2010. We are now beyond that point and still nothing. Just what is taking the Minister so long? Even now, the government's motion does not mention the promised fuel vouchers. Minister Ryan did not refer to them last night at all. The Taoiseach said this morning that vouchers won't be introduced until the carbon levy is imposed on solid fuels. Again, it's changing the goalposts. 10 months after the Budget Day announcement, the government has still no plan to help the poorest in our society to deal with the cost of the carbon levy. The fact of the matter is that Budget 2010 was littered with half-baked measures that were announced without first working out how they would be implemented. And chief among them was the carbon levy. The government shouldn't have introduced the levy without first having a plan to offset the effects of that levy on those who simply cannot afford to heat their homes. It was an act of stubborn and recklessness, in my view, stubborn and reckless administration, and Minister Ryan's failure to even mention this issue in his amendment shows just how out of touch the Green Party is, along with Fianna Fáil. 340,000 households in this country receive a fuel allowance. It is a condition of that scheme that you must be in receipt of a social welfare payment. So we are talking about the poorest cohort of people in this country. For the thousands of those households that are reliant on oil and gas to heat their home, the carbon levy has imposed a very significant extra cost. And remember, they're not just paying extra via the carbon levy, because it seems that because of an inane EU ruling, they're also paying VAT on top of the carbon levy. And for many, it has come at a time when their basic social welfare payment has been reduced. The cost of home heating oil, which was already on the increase, rose by nearly 9% as a result of the carbon levy alone. The Taoiseach should note that this has contributed to a 27% increase in home heating oil in the last year, and a rise of a staggering 124% since the start of 2007. Perhaps the Taoiseach might like to correct the record in view of his misinformed comments this morning. I must point out too that many more poor families, including thousands who would be considered the working poor, do not qualify for fuel allowance because they are not in receipt of a social welfare payment. And because they don't get fuel allowance, these same families are generally also excluded from the Warmer Home Scheme. In addition, their income is generally too low to be able to afford the works under the Home Energy Scheme, so they are caught on both fronts. These are the people who pay for everything, but get very little in return. It seems the government is just not interested in people in these circumstances. In coming to a decision, whenever that may be, I would urge the government to consider a proposal put forward by the Active Retirement Associations of Ireland. They made this earlier in the year to the Social Protection Committee. At that meeting, it was suggested that home heating oil should be added to the categories covered under the Household Benefit Package. The current structure of the scheme disadvantages people who rely on oil for their home heating. Allowances under this package are currently available in respect of electricity, gas and bottled gas, but not oil. And given that the carbon levy has impacted most on users of oil, this suggestion is really worth considering. But to finish then, it's time that the government delivered on its promise to produce a fuel poverty strategy. The litany of missed deadlines and forgotten commitments is the reason why we are debating this motion tonight. The measures have been agreed by Cabinet and were to be introduced long before now. We are not asking government to do anything it doesn't agree with or anything it cannot afford. We are simply asking the government to do what it promised it would do. It is yet another reason to ask, why is this government still in power? It has clearly lost all interest in the people it is meant to be serving. Sadly, this is yet just another broken promise. Thank you.